that even though the major countries of the United States and Canada claim that they are founded upon democracy and upon freedom and justice, for the indigenous people of this world, it was something totally different. It's like two different worlds that people are living in. One bubble in the sense of the indigenous people who lived here over 10,000 years, who established a society, whose blood is in the soil, and another reality of the settlers. And those were the colonial people who came to this land in order to conquer the land and to subjugate the people in an apparent fleeing from the injustice that they faced and the difficulties. But the sad reality of human life is that in many cases human beings have short memories. And so even though they may have felt oppression, they oppress other people. And so the indigenous people, up until today, in this part of the world, where in Canada they start their programs and they say it is the unceded territory of the indigenous people, and they start naming indigenous tribes, meaning that they never gave up, that there was a treaty, it's supposed to be their land, and that's what they say. But the reality is something totally different, that the native people are, for the most part, living in reservations and have been exterminated, millions of people exterminated. When Columbus came, there were over 73 million indigenous people living in this part of the world, and the majority were killed through disease and through poisoning of water and through active violence. In order to build the land in this part of the world, the colonial subjugators needed cheap labor. So they turned to the African continent to find people who they could subjugate, and they enslaved African people, first using trickery, one tribe versus another, taking political prisoners, and then eventually establishing a major slave trade. And this slave trade and the toil of the African people is what built these countries. But yet, up until today, African people have not gained their full freedom. And when you look at the prison system, you will find that still the majority, proportionately, in the prisons in America are African Americans. And I heard a shocking statistic the other day that something like 50 to 60% of women in Canadian jails are indigenous. Think about this. Women prison, that the majority of the prisoners are indigenous women. How is this possible? It is possible when people have a double standard, when they have one for their own people and other for those who they subjugate and control. And so the struggle is a long struggle. And we are seeing it played out in the colonial countries. There was a period of time in Africa and Asia, especially in the 50s and the 60s, in the 20th century, when liberation movements came and people were fighting for their independence. And it is said that the Algerian people lost 1 million people to the French. 1 million died in order for them to gain their liberation. And that continues. In many cases, it's a type of neo-colonialism. So it's a new form that colonialism takes, which is indirect. It's using economics, and it is using divide and conquer. And another form, which has now come to the surface in front of everybody's eyes, is really the old form of colonialism, which is straight out slavery, subjugation, and apartheid. And that is playing itself out in Israel itself with the Palestinian people, who are the indigenous people of the land, who date back thousands of years in that part of the world. They're not newcomers, they're not immigrants, but yet it's a double standard. And it's a shock for many people when they see government officials here, people who we thought were open-minded, balanced type people to support the slaughter and the atrocities. But the reality is, one settler supports another settler. It's the same experiment that was done. It's the same program of settler colonialism that is still going on here in this part of the world. And it is sort of a polite way of carrying out this colonialism. And for those who were involved in the struggle for the indigenous people's rights and African people's rights in this part of the world, we recognized that this is a long, protracted struggle. This is not overnight. And there will be times when our emotions are high, but there has to be a program. There has to be a plan. And it has to be one that is not based on emotion, but it is based upon solid realities, and in our case, come directly from the life and the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And so we are looking at pivotal moments in Islamic history to gain that type of wisdom that we need to keep the struggle going, to not get caught up in emotional outbursts, but to channel our emotions in a positive way, standing at the same time for justice whenever we possibly can. And so, with this in mind, when we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, we find that he was insulted, tortured, his followers were killed, driven out of the land, they were put under a terrible boycott, sanctions, where they were starving to death, where they were literally eating leaves, boiling their sandals to make soup. Think about this, how hungry they actually were. And while this is going on, the Prophet ﷺ has got the greater picture of things, that along with the suffering he is going through and his companions, there has to be a greater struggle. To deal with the local struggle, he allowed his companions to make hijrah. So they first made migration to Al-Habasha, to Ethiopia. He was allowing them. So this is a way to deal with the issue on the ground. So people are suffering, try to work on some way to end their suffering. And this is similar to what's happening with the Palestinian people, to try our best in however we can to work on some way to end the suffering and the genocide, because it is moving in the direction of complete genocide and destruction and extermination of the Palestinian people. At the same time, the greater plan. There is something else that we have to be doing at the same time. And we want to look at the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to see what he was doing to balance. It's a balanced approach. And when we take the balanced approach, then our outcomes are greater than just an emotional approach, a one-sided approach. And so when we look at his life, and we're talking about 11 years after the prophethood, and at that time the Prophet ﷺ still trying to give dawah to the different tribes, Banu Kalb, Banu Hanifa, Banu Amir, but they were not responding still as groups. Only individuals were coming into Islam. But it is in that year that secret meetings were held with the Aus and the Khazraj. And these are the main Arab tribes of Yathrib. And Yathrib is the city north of Mecca that is well known because it's in a mountainous volcanic area. And the volcano left volcanic ash and volcanic rock on two sides of the city. So you couldn't enter from the east side or the west side. Also, the city was known to have water, a lot of rainfall. And that continued until recently. Somebody had told me that their grandfather had made Hajj in 1950 and whatnot, and when they went to Medina, they were swimming. They swam in ponds. So there was water still there in that time. And these tribes of Aus and Khazraj originally came from Yemen, because Yemen is the base of Al-Arab al-Ariba, and that is the root Arabs. Okay, that's where Arabic took its modern form, you could say. The original Arabic-speaking people that were still left. And they came from Yemen and they settled in this area. And also in this area, the Banu Israel, the tribes of the Yahud, settled also in Yathrib. And their intention for settling there was the fact that they believed that a prophet would come from the children of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And they had some records of this, some understanding of the coming of a prophet, and they of course thought that he would come from their side, not knowing that he actually came from Abraham or Ibrahim on the side of Hajar, Ismail, right? That's Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the people of Yathrib were different than the people of Mecca, because the Arabs at that time, even though they were coming out of paganism, they were familiar with the people of the book. So they were familiar with the belief in one God. And the Yahud would then curse them whenever they got into a fight and say to them that when our prophet comes, he will lead us to destroy you. So they knew about this. And some of them, Allah opened up their heart very early, and they start recognizing, no, this is a different side of the Abrahamic family, and they started to embrace Islam. So when this was happening, the Prophet ﷺ, although he had not made hijrah, he had not migrated, he allowed his followers to leave because they were getting killed. He didn't make it himself. He was still under great threat. People dying, insulted, driven out of their homes, but yet there was something else that he was looking, and that was to spread Islam. Because in the spreading of Islam, you are then not only taking people from darkness into light, but you are setting a base in order to ultimately defeat the evil. Because the evil has a base. And the followers of Shaitan have been spread around the earth. There are shayateen al-jinn, from the jinn themselves, created from smokeless fire. But there's also shayateen al-ins. There are devils amongst the human beings who are actually, although they are human, they are devilish in their behavior. And we see it today, what's happening in the world, the shayateen al-ins. And so, for the people of Yathrib, the Prophet ﷺ chose an individual, Musab ibn Umayr, radiallahu anh, to be his first ambassador. So this is an offensive move. Now think about warfare now. Because it's a war between haqq and batil, truth and falsehood. You're under attack, you're overwhelmed, you're surrounded, but instead of just being defensive all the time, you go on the offense, right? And through your offense, then you are able to set a base to ultimately defeat the forces of evil. So he chose Musab ibn Umayr radiallahu anh as his ambassador. And it's important to understand Musab himself, who he actually was, and how important he was to the believers. What's interesting to note about Musab, and this is happening in the world today with many of the developed countries and people who are well off, that Musab was actually born in luxury. He was extremely rich. He was rich to the point where in Mecca, they considered him to be the pride of the youth. He was the model. He was the star. He was the one that people would dress like. They wanted to have their hair like him. They wanted to talk like him. They wanted to walk like him. So he was a model for the youth. And because of this, he got special attention. The people in society always opened their doors for him. And even the nobility, even the leaders of Quraysh, who were generally over 40 years old, they would allow him as a young man to sit in the nadwa, so he could get a seat there in the parliament, even though he was a young person. And so this was a great honor that he had amongst the Quraysh, and he was well informed. And the Quraysh had their spies and their networks, and Musab radiallahu anh, he was well informed of what was happening in Arabia at the time. And of course, much of their discussion in the Nadwa was concerning Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. In the same way that when you look at newspapers today, and you look at news agencies, and you will see not just Palestinian situation, you're going to see of the world issues, most of them are dealing with Muslims somewhere. Okay, because Islam is rising. And it is rising. And do not think because people are dying that we're not rising. Because it is the blood of the martyrs, of the shuhada, which has given the impetus for Muslims to rise in the past. And inshallah, it will happen again. And so Musab became aware of Dar al-Arqam. And we remember that Al-Arqam, Ibn Abi al-Arqam, that he had donated his house there in Mecca. He had donated this to the Muslims, a type of waqf. Remember, that's a trust that he had done, and it's an all-purpose Islamic center. And so this was, in a sense, like a secret hideout. And when we say underground, it doesn't necessarily mean you're under the ground, but it just means you're in a place that the general public is not aware of. And so Musab had this information. And he was a very direct, straightforward person. And so he said, I want to go to this place. Of course, he felt he had a type of privilege too, because people generally liked him and they listened to him. And so he went to the secret meeting place. Okay? And of course, this is near Safa and Marwa. You know, you have in Mecca itself, the Aqaba and Zamzam. And then when you do your Umrah and Hajj, you run between Safa and Marwa, the mountains. And so the Dar al-Arqam was over by the area of Safa. And Musab, radiallahu anh, he went to this place, he searched, he had good information, and he found Dar al-Arqam, and he knocked on the door, and they allowed him to come in. He was not a violent person known to be armed. He did not have an army with him. They let him come in, and then he listened to the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. The believers read the Quran to him. Now, this is important, because reading the Quran to an Arabic-speaking person, especially somebody who knows their language, this in itself is a form of da'wah. Because the Quran is revealed in a way that contradicts language. It's not poetry. And it's not prose. So some people speak in prose, they tell stories. And some people do poetry, where you have rhythmic information. This was rhymed prose. So this is telling a story in rhythm, like the story of Nuh alayhi salam and the flood. You get the whole story and it's all rhymes. Nobody can talk like that. Even in English up until today, nobody can talk in rhythm and make sense. And those who try to talk like this in what they call hip-hop, the rap music, three-quarters of what they say does not make sense. But because it has a good rhythm, the younger generation are attracted to it. But if you listen to the words of what they're saying, for the most part, it doesn't make any sense because you cannot talk like this. Okay, and so Allah opened up his heart. He literally changed. There was something in him, and he embraced Islam. And he pledged to dedicate himself and to dedicate his talent in order to help the Muslims. Of course, the believers then, takbir, Allahu Akbar, this was a great victory. This is Musab. So this is the most famous, one of the most famous young men in Mecca at the time. And that meant that you were one of the most famous people in Arabia at the time, and he was embracing Islam. So this was a great victory for the believers. But Musab, like many young people, he had a test. And that test was coming directly from his family. And in this case, his mother, Khunnas bint Malik, she was a strong believer in idols. Strong believer. And she spoiled her son. She would give him everything that he wanted. She tried to groom him and make him out to be like what she wanted him to be, but he refused to do this. And when she started to realize what was happening, and he's debating with her and she's realizing it, she tied him up in the corner. Like what some parents would try to do, you know, when their youth are doing wrong, they say, you're locked down, you're not going outside. I'm taking away your, now you take the cell phone. Right? You try to control them. But unfortunately, because the youth are youth, they can figure out some way to come through the blockade. And so he was tied in a corner in his house. He was imprisoned. And he found a way. And he escaped. And this is around the time when the Muslims were making their move to Al-Habasha. And he found a way to go with the believers. And he was one of the people, Muhajirin, who went on the first hijrah to Ethiopia. So this is a very strong part of his personality. This is a person who was spoiled in his early life. He has to give up everything. And he has to go to Al-Habasha. And this here in your picture is the Ark of the Covenant. This is in Aksum, the place called Aksum, which is in the Tigray land of Ethiopia. And they believe they have the Ark of the Covenant there. That is the special chest where Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, Solomon, where he kept special things, and they say there was power coming out of this, the Ark of the Covenant. The Yahud today, they want that thing. That's one of the reasons why they want to knock down Mashal al-Aqsa, and they're digging under the ground, all in the area, because they think they might find the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so because they think if they have this, they'll have the power to now make everybody be quiet. Just subjugate not only the Palestinians, but the Middle East and the earth, because their intention is to be the rulers of the earth. And so this is the Ark of the Covenant, and that person who is there is actually, may look like a Muslim there with a jubbah and a turban, but is a Christian, because there are Christian monks who live in this area, and they spend their whole life there. They believe they have something. I spoke with a historian, and a Palestinian historian, and he said that there's something of value here that the Ethiopians have, but it's not the Ark of the Covenant, because it would not make sense for Suleiman to give this, even though his wife was Bilqis, right? Radiallahu anha, Ethiopian queen, queen of Sheba, and their son was Menelik. That was their son. So even though he had the connection there, why would he give away the Ark of the Covenant? Does not make sense. Okay, but they have something which may date back to his time. They have something inside of this place. So Musab, radiallahu anh, he spent his time there in Ethiopia and going through the changes he went. But because he was a young person, and sometimes young people, they have a yearning for their home. And so he wanted to go back. And it is said that after a few years of being in Ethiopia, that the Quraysh listened to Surah An-Najm. This is the chapter of the star, Surah An-Najm. And in this chapter, which is a beautiful chapter, very melodical chapter, it mentions Lat and Uzza. It mentions the gods of the Mushrikeen. But of course it corrects them. But when they heard this, they thought that the Prophet was coming over. And so in the surah it says prostrate. And so the believers prostrated, and the Quraysh prostrated with them. Now when the word got out that the Quraysh were prostrating, the word started to spread that they had all embraced Islam. And it went rapidly to the point where it reached Ethiopia. And Musab thought that, okay, maybe this is my chance. And so he was one of the few people, he returned to Mecca. This is before the major hijrah to Medina. So he went back to Mecca. But when he went back, he did not find what he wanted. Because the Quraysh, when they realized that this chapter was not for them, it was against them, they became more vicious than they were previously. So Musab was in a very difficult situation. And he was cut off. He went back to his home. That's a natural thing. He's a young person. And his mother then turned insane. And she said, "You're not just locked down. You're not my son." And she kicked him out into the street. So this is Musab ibn Umayr, the fashion statement of Mecca, the most popular person amongst the youth. He's homeless. That's what we would call today a homeless person. He had to live outside. And because times were difficult, the Quraysh, they had their boycott that was going on. Even though it officially stopped, they were still boycotting Muslims. He became homeless and he was wearing rags. And then he made his way to Dar Arqam. And when the believers saw him, they cried. Because this now is the fashion statement of Mecca, who is wearing rags. He's a homeless person, destroyed on the outside. But the Prophet ﷺ gave him glad tidings that through his pain and suffering, that there would be a way out for him and a way out for the believers. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, recognized special qualities in Musab. And so even though he was physically down, he had gone through so much, he had come back, the Prophet, peace be upon him, made him his first, what we would call today, ambassador. So he was be sent to the people of Yathrib. That is what you call a da'iyah. Da'iyah is the person who gives dawah. So that was his assignment, to go to the people of Yathrib and to teach Islam. So you see, so this is very defensive type situation. But what does the Prophet, peace be upon him, do? Offense. See, he goes on the offense. He sends his people out, right? He has a place for those who can't take the punishment. So he is defending his people. But at the same time, defense, offense. You see, going on at the same time. And Musab had certain qualities. And these are the qualities that we need to foster within our children. And we need to recognize if we find people in our community who have these qualities, then we need to empower them. Because that is what we're going to need in this world. Because the struggle that is going on today, you have to realize, one of the greatest part of the struggles is not just the hot war. It's the propaganda war. It is the total lies and the total disinformation that is being put out there about Islam and about Muslims. So we are going to have to take an offensive ourselves. We can no longer sit back. We will have to take an offensive. So Musab was chosen for his character. He had really good character. He had fine manners. He had knowledge. And he was a good reciter of the Quran. Remember, this is important. It's an important part of the dawah. And one of his greatest qualities was his mind was sharp. And he could communicate. So he was known amongst the youth. So he's a good natural communicator with people. And that is what we need today to empower communicators, right, in order to deal with the propaganda war that is going on in the world. And there are many innocent, ignorant people here in Canada, in America, and other places. They're ignorant, but they are so surrounded by lies that they don't have an opportunity to really hear something else. Fortunately, one of the good sides of the internet is the fact that it's not controlled by CNN and BBC and CBC and all the channels of the world. No. There's still an independent part of the internet. So information is still able to come out. And so Musab then took on his assignment. And he went to Yathrib, and there, along with Sa'd ibn Zurara, these two individuals became the two chief people of Dawah. And their mission was to go to the people of Yathrib, to visit them, and to teach them the message of Islam. And so this is your offensive. And Sa'd, he was from the Khazraj tribe. So he could go directly to them, and he would go into their homes, into their gatherings, and he would bring up the belief in one God. He would teach them about prophethood, that what you heard the Yahud cursing you with, it's here. It's amongst the Arabs. It's amongst the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so he would go to the Khazraj and go to the Aus. And also Musab himself would go to the different people. And there were many different incidents. There is one tribal leader, Usayd ibn Khudayr, that he's a typical Arab tribal leader at the time, very bold and rude and arrogant type. And so when he heard about this, he went to find Musab and Sa'd. And so he found Musab sitting down outside under a date palm tree, relaxing, and he came and he put the spear onto Musab's head. Right? He said, "Now, what is this thing you're talking about?" Now, many people with a weapon, person's got a gun, on your head. Right? Many people would lose control of themselves because death is right there. But Musab was not like this. And Musab just said, he was calm. He said, "Calm down. Calm down." In words, he said that if I want you to listen to the Quran, listen to it. Listen to the message. If you think that this is a waste of time, then I'll leave. But I want you to listen to it. So Usayd took this on, and then Musab now read the Quran to him. And this is the power of Islam, that here's a person who's the enemy. He's ready to kill Muslims with his bare hands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then softened his heart. And this person eventually he embraced Islam, and he went back to his people, and his people embraced Islam in crowds. They accepted Islam in crowds behind this. Okay? And you have Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who later becomes a famous Sahabi. Sa'd ibn Ubadah, right? These are all great Ansar. They later become known as the Ansars. They embraced Islam. And so within a year's time, 1 year of the arrival of Musab to Yathrib, Islam had spread to every home amongst the Arabs. And this set the stage for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, because the next year, it was in that following year, that they intended to meet in Al-Aqaba. That is the place in Mina where they had met in the 11th year. And now they were going to meet in the following year. And so the stage was set for the meeting in Al-Aqaba. So it was the 12th year after the prophethood that the Prophet ﷺ met with 12 people of Yathrib. So these people represented the leadership. And Musab returns with them for dawah. Okay, then the second pledge comes. So this is the demand, the second pledge. It was in the second pledge here in Aqaba, right, that the representatives of the Yathrib tribes come. 73 men and 2 women. And you might say, well, that's misogynistic. Like today, over, man, there'd be a feminist revolution. But if you look at the society and what this meant, these people who went, they were going to take bay'ah. They represented groups. So these 2 women represented the women there in Yathrib, and that was unheard of amongst the Arabs at that time. So that they were actually, you could say, they were given voting power. So they had votes. Because the bay'ah, the people who were taking the bay'ah, it's like a vote. So they were given voting power to represent the women of Yathrib. And if you put that in context of the time where women, had no authority within the Arab society, this was a major thing that was happening already. And they took the pledge. They took the pledge, and alhamdulillah, this was a pivotal moment. This is a pivotal moment. This is an offense. Okay, while the negativity is hitting us, while the confusion it is, offense at the same time. Make an offense. Get people to understand what Islam is. Don't just get caught on your emotion. Channel your emotion to fight against the propaganda that is being spread about Muslims. And it was in this time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Hajj, verse 41, and Surah Al-Anfal, verse 39, permission was given to fight. And it is this time where Allah is saying, وَقَاتِلُوهُمْ حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ فِتْنَةً وَيَكُونَ الدِّينُ كُلُّهُ لِلَّهِ. Allah said, fight them until there is no more oppression in the land. And that the major religion will be for Allah. So fight them. قَاتِلُوهُمْ. So permission was given to fight. And so this is because of this offensive movement that was made, they now had permission to defend themselves. This is pivotal. This is a pivotal moment. Because now they're in a different situation. They were not given permission to fight in Mecca. They had to suffer, be tortured, leave their homes. But they were not given permission to fight back. And so a pivotal moment has happened, and this is the offense which led to this. I want to open up the floor for any questions that anybody may have concerning this offense, which in many cases is the best defense. So I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody may have about this move that the Prophet ﷺ made. Online, are there any questions online?
So no questions online.
So this is a pivotal move. And this opens up the way for the complete hijrah. And so the migration then begins. Yathrib is now a place that is open. Muslims are being embraced by the society itself. And so now it's a shift in power. So Muslims are no longer mustadafin. Mustadafin are the weak people in the land. Now they have a chance to build themselves. And that is the reason why Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu and the companions, they chose the after the hijrah to begin the calendar. So the Islamic calendar begins after the migration. Okay? Why? Because now they are no longer weak people in the land. Now they have a chance to change everything. That's a pivot. You see, that is a physical change that has gone on amongst the believers. And we studied in the last series, we looked at the hijrah and all the ramifications, coming out of it. But what we have to realize is in this pivot to Yathrib, in this pivot to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ established, he made foundations for the city. These foundations would help enable Yathrib to become Al-Madinat al-Munawwara, the lighted city, and then now from there to spread Islam around the world. The first was to strengthen the relationship between believers and their Lord. That's the first move. And that is by the establishment of the House of Allah as an all-purpose Islamic center. All-purpose Islamic center. And this is important because the masjid is not supposed to be just a place where people make salat. It is a place of ta'aleem, of learning. It is a place of decision-making. It is a place of dawah. It is a place even to feed those who are in need of relief. So many things happen within the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay, so this is the first part, the foundation. The second is true brotherhood. And that is the ukhuwah. That is the ukhuwah, the brotherhood of believers. And that is a contract between people. And that's an important thing. That is part of what we have to do now. Because for too long, and we have gone through this situation with Palestine over and over again, and people tend to forget. People think that it's not concerning them because their relationship with the people there is not, it's superficial one. Okay? But this relationship is a social contract. It's like we have a contract with our family members. So whether you like it or not, we used to say blood is thicker than water. Whether you like it, your child, you may do all kinds of crazy things, but you're ready to take them back. Because you have a contract. It's like a social contract. They came through you. When you take Shahada, there is supposed to be a social contract between believers. That means that, as in the case of the Ansar and the Muhajirin, that whatever is mine, if I am the Ansari, the people of Medina, it is yours. Okay, we share everything. Not just share a salat line, but even wealth we share. And this ukhuwah, the Prophet ﷺ even said, I want to put people together. He made an example, and he put certain people together for this contract. He made an example of himself and Ali, radiallahu anh. Okay, and then, surprisingly enough, people may not be aware of this, but also Hamza, radiallahu anh, and Zayd ibn Thabit, he made this social contract in between them. Okay, the famous one is Abdurrahman ibn Auf and Sa'd ibn Abi Rabi'a. And Abdurrahman was a very wealthy person, one of the richest people in Medina. And when Sa'd came, then Abdurrahman said, take half of my property. Okay? Whatever you want, I'll give to you. But Saad basically said, just give me some sticks, give me some wood, firewood. Where's the marketplace? Okay? And, okay, I'll turn it around. It was actually Saad who was the person in Medina, right? And Abdurrahman ibn Auf, remember, he was one of the early Sahaba. Okay? So Abdurrahman, then coming from Medina, and Saad, now wealthy person there in Yathrib, Saad gave him what he needed. Abdurrahman went to the marketplace, sold the goods, got the profit, continued until he became one of the richest people in Medina. And this is what some people even call sharecropping. And sharecropping is where you have a field, you have crops, and you allow somebody to farm on a certain section of your property. So they can work that. They will give you something from it. They get themselves, so everybody benefits. And eventually maybe you even give it to them. So they have it 100%. And so this is more than just lip service. Okay, this is something else, and Muslims are under a test now. We're under a test in many parts of the world where people are under the gun. You know, what is our relationship with the people on the ground? Okay? This is a test. And this is the foundation that was set. And the third part was the covenant of Medina, and that is where the Prophet ﷺ then became the leader of Medina, and he made a treaty even with other people, even the people of the book, the Yahud, who act like Muslims are so much against them, right? They were living in peace in Medina by the Prophet himself. So this covenant was made, even with some of the polytheists who were living there. So this was the foundation of the Islamic city-state, which eventually came out to be the basis of the Islamic state or the ruling area, the Ummah, for the whole Muslim world that governed the world, you know, for hundreds of years. And so that was the basis. But getting back to Musab himself, just to end off what happened to him, he, they called him Musab al-Khair. He was the good. And during the Battle of Uhud, and we may talk about that as we go on, it was a very difficult situation, and the believers were fighting in the battle. Musab had the flag. And they hit his arm, and he held the flag with his left. They hit his left arm, and he held it with the stumps of his arms. Continue holding the flag until he was cut down. And he was one of the believers, the shaheeds, who died there. And the Prophet ﷺ, they shed tears when they had his body. They didn't even have enough material. His clothing was short, it didn't drag on the ground or anything. And so they didn't even have enough cloth to cover him. And so they had to take sticks or anything to put it on the bodies, you know, as they buried the shaheeds. This is the best generation, right? This is the best generation, what they have gone through. Because life is a transition. And the ones who pass away as shaheed, right, they will see what will be their victory in the next life. They will understand this victory. And so Musab radiallahu anh gave his life and became one of the great shaheeds, paying the ultimate sacrifice. And you could say Musab went from wealth to poverty, and then poverty to paradise. So this is like his biography, right? He went through all of these changes and eventually to paradise, to Jannah. And that is a great achievement of Musab radiallahu anh. And it shows tactics of the Prophet ﷺ. Not only be defensive, but sometimes an offense is the best defense. So we will have to learn to take an offense and not just be on the defense as well. And so this story is a great example of a pivot that shifted in Islamic history at this point, where the believers had the right to fight back and where the foundation was set for Islam, which eventually spread to the four corners of the earth. So I want to open up the floor for any questions anybody has concerning this great pivot that went on and Musab radiallahu anhu. Floor is open for any questions or feedback. Any general questions anybody has? Floor is open for any general questions before we close off tonight. So we find ourselves in a very difficult world. This is our reality. You have to read the signs of the Day of Judgment. You've got to read this. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse until it reached the point where people are saying, Meta Nasrullah. When is the help of Allah? And at that point, it is destined that the Mahdi would appear. There would be leadership that would come out of the Muslim world, and we will be faced with a major malhama. It's an Armageddon. And it is now, everything is moving in the direction of this. And we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have mercy upon our brothers and sisters in Gaza and in Palestine, and all those who are suffering on the ground. And may Allah accept the shuhada, those who have died in His path, and give them the highest part of Jannah. I leave you with these thoughts, and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.